Oh, her? That's just the lady who helps out. Birdie's an asset we own now. You shouldn't even be here. Make yourself scarce and get out of my sight.
I was standing in the back kitchen of my own life, holding a tray of little cakes I had baked with my own two hands, when I heard my daughter-in-law point across a room full of investors and say, "Oh, her, that is just the lady who helps out." There was a hired actress up front in a flour-dusted apron, smiling for the cameras, playing a sweet old grandmother named Birdie who never once existed. And me, the real one, the woman whose mother that brand was named for, the woman who built every recipe in that company with her own hands, I was told to keep the coffee hot and stay out of the photos. So I set down my tray, I smiled, and not one soul in that shiny glass room had the first idea that the name on every single jar they were about to sell for millions of dollars still legally belonged to me. My name is Cora Brennan. I am 67 years old, and this is the story of the night I stopped being grateful. If you are listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments, and please stay with me until the end. Because what you are about to hear took me 3 years to live and about 40 minutes to undo, and I want you right here beside me for every bit of it. Let me back up some, because you cannot understand what I did in that room until you understand the room, and you cannot understand the room until you understand the woman who walked into it carrying that tray. It was a Thursday in March in the suburbs north of Nashville, and Larkin had spent something close to $60,000 throwing what she called a brand reveal. That was my daughter-in-law, Larkin. That is not even her real name, but we will get to that because the name is half the story. She had rented out a glass-walled event space with the whole city glittering behind it, hung the place in cream and gold, and filled it up with influencers and two serious money men from a company called the Calderwood Group, who had flown in from out of state because they bowed about 90% of the way to buying my late mother's name right out from under me. They just did not know that last part yet. Neither did Larkin, God help her. And that is the truth I want you to hold on to as I tell you the rest. The brand was called Birdie's. Birdie was my mother. Her name was Roberta Hale, but everybody from our house to the county line called her Birdie because she sang while she worked, little and quick, and always humming some hymn or other under her breath. She taught me to bake on a wood stove, back when my feet did not reach the floor and I had to stand on an overturned milk crate to reach the counter. So when I tell you that I stood in the back of that party and watched a paid stranger in a costume apron pretend to be my dead mother for a phone camera, I need you to feel the exact flavor of that. It is a peculiar thing to watch somebody play your mama for money while you carry around the little cakes. And the worst part, the part I still chew on some nights when sleep will not come, is that I had nobody to blame for any of it but myself. Because I had handed them every last piece of it with a smile on my face and gratitude in my heart. Here is how a woman ends up being the help in a company named for her own mother. I opened the Real Birdies back in 1991 in a little brick storefront on the main street of the town where I grew up, about an hour southeast of where I was standing that night. Just me and a second-hand oven I bought off a closing diner and my mother's recipe box, this dented old tin thing with a meadowlark painted on the lid that her own mother had given her before I was born. I ran that shop for 25 years. I want you to sit with that number a moment. 25 years. I opened that door at 4:30 every morning, in the dark, in the cold, when my knees were good and long after they were not, and I baked until the cases were full, and the bell over the door started ringing. You should have seen it on a Saturday in its prime. The line would run out the door and down the sidewalk past the hardware store. Old farmers in their good shirts buying a dozen rolls for church the next morning. Young mamas with babies on their hips. The high school kids who came in after practice and put their last few dollars on the counter for a slice and a glass of milk. My husband Lyle worked the register on the busy days, and he had this way of knowing everybody's name and everybody's troubles, asking after a sick mother here and a new grandbaby there, so that coming into Birdie's felt less like buying bread and more like being remembered. He did the books on a yellow legal pad at our kitchen table every Sunday night, licked the tip of his pencil, frowned at the columns, told me we were going to be just fine, and somehow, year after year, we always were. The thing that put us on the map was a buttermilk honey cake, and I will not give you the recipe for it even now, not on this video, not for anything, because some things a woman keeps for herself. People drove 2 counties over for that cake. We shipped them in tins at Christmas, packed in straw, and the post office hated us every December and loved us too. A food writer came down from the city one time, ordered a slice, ate it slow, and then wrote that it was the finest thing she had put in her mouth in the whole state of Tennessee. Lyle cut that article out of the paper, drove 40 minutes to the good frame shop, and hung it by the register, where it stayed until the day we turned the key in that lock for the last time. We closed in 2015. Lyle got sick that spring, the first time, and you cannot run an oven at 4 in the morning and sit in a chemotherapy chair at noon. So I chose my husband the way I would choose him 1,000 times over. I never once regretted it, not for a single day. We got 8 more good years out of that choice, 8 years of slow mornings and long drives and his hand in mine, before the cancer came back for good and took him at the end of 2023. 44 years we were married. I still reach over for him in the dark some mornings before my mind catches up and remembers the bed is half empty now and going to stay that way. Now here is where Larkin walks into it. My son Wade married her in the fall of 2014. She was bright and quick and hungry, and she had a way of making you feel like the most interesting person in any room she stood in, which is a real and rare gift. And also, I would come to learn, a kind of weapon. By 2018, with my shop closed and dark, and my mother's name just sitting there gathering dust on a shelf in my memory, Larkin came to me with an idea. She was clever about the internet in a way I never could be. She wanted to bring Birdie's back, but not as a bakery, as a lifestyle brand, she called it. Candle and cake mixes and pretty little videos of a warm country kitchen, that whole slow living, sit down at grandma's table, count your blessings kind of feeling that does so well online. And she looked me dead in the eye, and she took both my hands in hers, and she said, "Cora, your mother's story deserves to live again, and I want the whole world to taste what this family makes. And I will tell you the truth, because I promised you the truth and not the pretty version," I cried. Right there at her kitchen island, I cried. I was a frightened widow in the making, watching my husband start to fail, and my life's work sit shuttered. And here was this young woman holding my hands and telling me my mother would not be forgotten after all. So I said yes. I said yes to all of it. I gave her the recipes. I gave her the name. I taught her how the buttermilk honey cake comes together, which is not a thing you can learn off a card. It is a thing your hands learn over 3 or 4 ruined batches while somebody who knows stands at your elbow. I told her the brand story in my own words. My mother on the milk crate, the meadowlark on the tin, the line out the door. I gave her everything but the one thing that would have protected me, and I will get to that thing, because that one thing is the whole story. The brand took off like I never could have dreamed. I mean, it truly took off. Larkin was a natural in front of a camera, warm and easy, and within 2 years, Birdie's had hundreds of thousands of followers. And then it crossed 1 million, and the money started coming in real. She had the look and the voice and a perfect cozy kitchen that was not even her own kitchen. It was a set she had built in a rented warehouse. Every copper pot hung just so. And somewhere in all that growing, quietly, a little at a time, the way the tide goes out so slow you do not know till your chair is sitting on wet sand, I got edited out of my own life. It started with small things. My name quit showing up in the captions. Then the company started telling the story just a touch different, that Birdie had been Larkin's grandmother, which she was not. Birdie was my mother and no blood kin to Larkin at all. Then my Lyle passed at the end of 2023, and a few months into my grief, my son moved me into their big house, said it only made sense, said the children needed their clothes, said I should not be rattling around alone in that empty place with all those memories. And it did make sense. For about a month, it even felt like family, like being folded back into the warm middle of something. And then, so gradual I could not tell you the day it happened, I became the woman who cooked the suppers and folded the laundry and told the den was being filmed that afternoon. So would I mind keeping the dog and myself upstairs until they wrapped? 3 years of that, 3 years of baking the actual cakes that went into the actual videos, while a younger, prettier, hired version of my mother got the credit on the screen. 3 years of being introduced, on the rare day I was introduced at all, as Wade's mother, who is just such a help around the house. And I told myself a story about it the whole time. I told myself this was what love looked like. I told myself a good mother makes herself small so her children can stand up tall. I am here on this video to tell you that was a lie, and I sold it to myself by the pound for 3 solid years, and the bill for all of it came due that Thursday evening in March. Because at the reveal party with the Calderwood men standing right there in their good suits, I came out of the back kitchen with a fresh tray, and one of them gave me a kind nod and asked Larkin, in that smooth way that people with money have, "Oh, and who is this?" And my daughter-in-law, a glass of champagne in her hand and a dress on her back that cost more than I used to clear in a good week, did not even turn to look at me. She just sort of waved her glass in my general direction and said, "Oh, her, that is just the lady who helps out. The recipes are all proprietary. Bertie is not really a person anymore. She is more of an asset we own." And then she laughed, this light little laugh, and turned to her sister beside her and showed her something on her phone. And the two of them left again. And I understood, standing there with my tray, that I was the joke up on that little screen, an asset we own. I want to tell you that I threw the tray. I want to tell you I made a scene that those glossy people are still whispering about to this day. But that is not the woman my mother raised. I do not make scenes. I keep records. So I set that tray down nice and gentle on the white linen table, and I smiled at the money man who had asked, and I walked over to the window where the whole city was coming up gold and blue behind the glass. And for the first time in 3 years, something inside me went very, very still. Because standing there at that window, I remembered something. It came up out of me slow, the way the truth always does. When you have been sitting on it so long, you have forgotten you were sitting on anything at all. Back in 2018, when we first started, Larkin had me sign papers, a whole stack of them, spread across her kitchen island, with her lawyer talking us through it on the speakerphone. Assignment of the trademark, she called it. Assignment of the recipes and the brand and the goodwill. And I signed wherever she pointed her manicured finger, because I trusted her and because she was family and because Lyle was sick down the hall and I was tired all the way to my bones. I did not read one single line. I, who had run a careful business for 25 years and never once signed a thing without reading it twice, signed that whole stack blind because the person handing it to me was the wife of my own son. I signed it all and I handed it back across the island and I never thought about it again. But at that window, 67 years old, watching a stranger in an apron hum my mother's hymns for a camera, I thought about it. Hard, because I am a baker, but before that and under that, I was a small business owner for a quarter of a century, and Lyle Brennan did not marry a fool, and there was one detail sitting way in the back of my mind like a stone that has worked its way into your shoe. Those papers were never finished. There had been a piece left undone, a final signature that needed a notary, and a filing that needed to go in with the Federal Trademark Office to make the whole thing real and legal. And the person who took that stack of papers up off the island that afternoon, the person who promised with a kiss on my cheek that he would carry it the rest of the way to the lawyer and see it done, was my own son, Wade. And in 8 long years, I had never once seen a single shred of proof that he had. I stood at that glass with my old heart going like a sparrow caught in a porch, and I did the arithmetic the way Lyle taught me at that kitchen table all those Sunday nights, slow and honest, no wishful thinking allowed in the columns. If those papers were never filed, then the assignment was never completed. And if the assignment was never completed, then in the eyes of the law it had never happened at all. And if it never happened, then every candle and every cake mix and every amber jar with a meadowlark stamped on the side, every single dollar of the deal those two men in their good suits were standing right there getting ready to sign. The whole shining empire that had quietly turned me into the lady who helps out was built on a name that did not belong to Larkin. It belonged to me. It had belonged to me the entire time. I did not say a word to a living soul. I lifted my purse off the hook in the back hall, the one down by the dog leash where they kept me and my few things, and I let myself out the side door into the cool March dark, and I stood alone in that parking lot under all those city lights, and I started, very quietly, to laugh. Not a happy laugh, the other kind. The kind that comes up out of a person when they finally understand that the joke was never on them after all. They had spent a fortune that night selling a grandmother they invented. They had clean forgotten the real one was still standing in the kitchen, and she still owned the name. I did not decide one single thing standing in that parking lot. I want to be honest with you about that, because the version where the wronged old woman walks out into the night vowing her revenge is a good story, but it is not a true one, and I told you I would only give you the true one. I did not decide anything that night. I just stopped pretending that I did not know. I went back to that house one more time, but only the one time, and only to take back what was already mine. I waited until the next afternoon when Larkin was off filming at the warehouse and Wade was at his office and the children were at school, and I let myself in with the key they had given me, the key they handed me like I was a guest in the very place I cleaned. And I will tell you, I did not take much. It surprised me how little there was. I had lived under that roof for 3 whole years, and when it came down to the leaving of it, almost nothing in the place was mine. I took my clothes. I took the photograph of Lyle from the windowsill of the guest room, the one from our trip to the coast, where he is squinting into the sun and laughing at something I said that I cannot for the life of me remember anymore, though I would give a good deal to. I took the quilt my own grandmother stitched by hand, the one Larkin always said did not go with the palette of the guest room, and asked me to keep folded in the closet. And I took the 2 things that mattered more than everything else in that house put together. I took my mother's recipe box, that dented old tin with the meadowlark on the lid, which they had been keeping out on a styled shelf in the warehouse kitchen as a prop. A prop. 25 years of my mother's own handwriting on those index cards, the buttermilk honey cake among them, in her looping hand that I would know in the dark, sitting on a film set being used for set dressing. I tucked it into my purse where it belonged, against my hip where I could feel the weight of it. Then I went out to the garage, and up high on the wall, behind the bikes that nobody rode, and the plastic bins of Christmas things, there it was. The original wooden sign from the real shop. Birdies, hand-painted in my mother's favorite blue, the paint gone soft at the edges from 25 years of weather and months, and my own hand touching it for luck every single morning when I turned the key. Larkin had hung it out there in the garage, like a piece of junk too sentimental to throw away, but too plain and too country to put on display. I lifted it down off that nail, and it was heavier than I remembered, the way meaningful things always are, and I carried it out to my car in both arms, the way you would carry a sleeping child out to the car after a long day. That was the whole of my great robbery. An old woman taking back a tin box and a wooden sign. I took the soul of the thing, and I left them every last bit of the shiny packaging. But before I left, I did one more thing, and I am prouder of it than I probably ought to admit. I went into that beautiful staged kitchen, and I found one of their empty product jars, the pretty amber glass ones they sold for $32 a piece, with a meadowlark embossed on the side, and I set it square in the dead center of the marble island where there was no way on earth a person could miss it. And on a plain piece of paper in my own hand, clear as a creek, I wrote, "Property of Cora Brennan, ask me nicely." And I propped that note up against the jar. Because I do not make threats and I do not make scenes, but I will surely leave a note. I will always leave a note. Then I locked that door behind me, and for the first time in 3 years, I did not leave the key sitting in the lock for them. I took it with me in my coat pocket, and I will tell you it is a funny thing how heavy a key can feel the very first time you decide to keep it instead of giving it back. I had already made one phone call that morning, before any of the rest of it, because I am not a woman who burns down the bridge before she has gone and built herself a boat. I called a lawyer named Renata Holt. Now I have to tell you about Renata, and I have to tell you straight, because she is not some kindly soul who came riding in to save the poor old grandmother. And I am frankly tired of stories where every single body just lines right up to help the white-haired lady. Renata and I went back near 30 years. When she was a young thing fresh out of law school, with her shingle barely hung, I let her do the legal work for the original shop, the little trademark filings and the lease agreements and all of it. And I sent her some of her very first real paying clients from around our town. We were close as anything for a long stretch of years. And then, about a decade back, we had ourselves a falling out. The kind two grown women our age have. Over money and over pride, and over a thing I said about her divorce that I had no earthly business saying. We had not spoken a word in years. So when I dialed her number that morning, I want you to know I had to eat a good big helping of crow just to make my finger press the buttons. She let it ring a long, long time before she picked up. And when she did, all she said was, "Well, Cora Brennan, to what do I owe?" And I said, "Renata, I need the finest intellectual property lawyer in the state of Tennessee, and I am reliably told that is still you. And I also owe you an apology that is about 9 years past due. And if you have got the time, I would dearly like to pay both of those debts today." There was a long quiet on the line. And then she laughed, this dry little laugh I had not heard in a decade. And she said, "You always did know how to lead with the part a person cannot say no to. Come in tomorrow morning at 8. Bring whatever paper you have got. And Cora, the apology I will take over lunch, sitting down, not over the telephone. I am not going to make it that easy on you. That is a 30-year friend who is still a little bit mad at you. And I will tell you what, they are worth 10 of the easy ones." So the next morning I sat across from her at her big glass desk, with a folder in my lap and my heart in my throat, and I told her the whole of it. The shop, the recipes, the papers on the island in 2018, my son carrying them off to finish, and me never once in 8 years seeing a lick of proof that he did. And I watched her face change as I talked, the way a person's whole face changes when they quit listening to you as an old friend and start listening as the sharpest attorney in the state. She picked up her pen. She started taking notes in a quick, slanted hand. She started asking me the kind of fast, particular questions me. She had already run 3 steps ahead of where I was sitting and seen exactly where the path was leading. And when I finished, she set her pen down flat on the desk and she looked at me over the top of her glasses and she said, "Cora, I am going to need a couple of days to pull the actual filings from the Federal Register and confirm what I think I am hearing. But if what you are telling me is true, if that assignment was never recorded and never completed, then I want to make good and sure you understand your own position before you walk out of this office. You are not a poor relation who got pushed around by an ungrateful girl. You are the registered owner of a trademark and the holder of trade secrets that a company with over 1 million followers has been using commercially for profit without any valid license for 8 years running. And there is a major acquisition pending that depends entirely on that company being able to sell to a buyer, something that it does not, in point of fact, own." She let that sit there in the air between us a moment. Then she said, "Cora, this is not a sad story about a mistreated grandmother. This is the cleanest, strongest hand I have held in years. And honey, I have held some hands. And I want to be honest with you about what I felt sitting in that leather chair. It was not triumph. It was something a good deal quieter and stranger than triumph. It was the plain feeling of being seen. After 3 years of being the lady who helps out, of being furniture, of being an asset somebody owned, here was a woman sitting across a desk telling me I was the one holding every card on the table, and the pure relief of being seen near about put me on the floor. Renata pulled the records over the next 2 days, and it was all exactly as I had felt it in my bones standing at that window. The assignment had been drafted in 2018. I had signed my name to it, but it had never been notarized the way the law required, and it had never been recorded with the trademark office, which meant that in the eyes of any court in this country, it had simply never happened. The trademark for Birdies was still registered to me, Cora Brennan, sole proprietor, the same as it had been since 1994. The recipes had never been assigned either. On paper, in every way a judge would ever care about, the entire brand still belonged to me, and it always had every single day of those 8 years. So Renata did the thing I had asked her to do, and she did it clean, and she did it on a Monday morning. And I picked that Monday on purpose, because I am a baker, and a baker knows in her bones that the very worst possible morning to learn your whole kitchen is on fire is the morning of your biggest show. Here's what I need you to understand, because the version of this in your head, the one all those revenge stories put there, probably has me storming through a door, screaming, throwing things, slamming my fist on a table. That is not how a thing like this actually gets done in the real world. The real damage was a letter. 2 letters, to be exact, on the firm letterhead of Renata Holt, sent by certified mail and by email both, at 9 o'clock on that Monday morning. One went to Larkin and to the company. The other went straight to the Calderwood Group and to their acquisition counsel. And those letters said, in language a great deal more polite than the situation had earned, that the trademark and the trade secrets underneath the entire Birdie's brand were owned by my client, Cora Brennan, that no valid assignment or license had ever been executed, that my client did not consent to the pending sale of property she had never once agreed to part with, and that Pete's all use of the Birdie's name was to cease pending the resolution of the matter. A cease and desist. With the proof attached, page after page of it, I did not throw one single thing. I did not raise my voice one time. I just had a lawyer mail 2 letters on a Monday morning. That is how a careful old woman burns a house all the way to the ground. She does it with a stamp, and she sleeps fine that night. Now I will tell you what happened across town, in the house I had left, but I am going to be careful in how I tell it, because some of it I saw with my own 2 eyes later on, and some of it I pieced together over the weeks that followed from 3 or 4 different people who were there, and I am not going to dress it up or pretend I was a fly on that wall. I am just going to give you what I came to know to be true. The letter hit Calderwood first thing, and I will tell you, a company like Calderwood does not gamble. Within a few hours, their own lawyers had done the one thing lawyers always do, which is go and verify the trademark register for themselves. And the moment they laid eyes on my name sitting right there on that registration, plain and solid as a fence post in a field, they froze. The whole deal. They did not pull out, not that day, but they put every last bit of it on ice, pending what they called clarification of the chain of title, which is a lawyer's way of saying we are not about to hand any soul millions of dollars for a name they cannot prove on paper that they own. And the timing, Lord above, the timing, because that very Monday was meant to be Larkin's big announcement. She had a whole campaign loaded up and scheduled, a grand reveal that an exciting new chapter was coming for the Birdies family, teasing the Calderwood partnership out to her million and more followers without quite naming the names yet. She had posts set to go and a live video planned for that evening. And somewhere in the middle of that beautiful, careful rollout, the phone calls started coming in from Calderwood's people and from her own lawyer, and the whole gleaming machine of everything she had built started to lock up, one gear at a time, with the whole world watching. My son Wade called me first. He called 11 times that day. I know the number because I counted them up that night, sitting on the edge of Ramona's spare bed. I had silenced his number, but I watched it light up the screen and go dark, light up and go dark, 11 separate times. He texted too. Mom, please call me. Mom, what did you do? Mom, there are lawyers calling, and Larkin is coming apart. Please just tell me you are safe. And then the last one, late, that I read twice and then a third time. Mom, I think I made a terrible mistake a long time ago, and I am so sorry. Please call me. I think I made a terrible mistake a long time ago. He knew. Of course my boy knew. He had carried those papers off that island in 2018, and he knew to the day exactly what he had and had not done with them, and that knowing had been sitting inside my son for 8 years like a stone he had swallowed and could not bring back up. But I will get to Wade. He is owed his own piece of this telling, and I am not going to hand it to you out of its proper order. I did not answer one single one of those calls. Not because I wanted him to suffer, though I will not lie to you and pretend there was not one small mean splinter of me sitting on that bed that did. I did not answer because I was somewhere else entirely. I was clear across town in the spare room of my oldest friend in this world, Ramona Pike, a woman I have known 40 years, who buried her Earl 2 winters the same hard way I buried my Lyle, so she knew without my having to find the words. She had the porch light burning for me. She had a pot of decaf going and a bed made up with clean line-dried sheets, and she did not ask me one single question when I came through her door with a tin box and a wooden sign in my arms. She just took the sign from me, gentle, and held it out and looked at it a long moment and said, "Well, now there she is," and went and set it up on her mantel like it was the finest thing in the house. Then she hugged me and she said, "You are home now." And that was the whole of it. 40 years. They do not make you explain yourself, the 40-year ones. And here is the part I think about the most, the part that tells you everything about where I had finally gotten to. That night, while $1 million empire with my dead mother's name on every jar shook itself to pieces across town, while my son dialed my number 11 times into the dark, while a hired actress somewhere folded up a costume apron that had never belonged to her and went home, I slept. I slept like the dead, like a baby, deep and dreamless under my own grandmother's quilt in Ramona Pike's quiet spare room, with my mother's recipe box on the nightstand, right where I could reach out in the night and lay my hand on it, and the old birdie's sign watching over the both of us from the mantel in the next room. It was the best sleep I had gotten in 3 solid years. They were up the whole night over there, holding the wreckage in their arms. And I was tucked in tight, sleeping, the deep sleep of a woman who had finally set down something so heavy she had forgotten it weighed a thing at all. Make of that what you will. My daughter Maeve flew in from Denver 2 days later, and let me be clear, she did not come to comfort her mother. She came to wage war. She walked into Ramona's kitchen still in her travel clothes, dropped her bag on the floor, and the very first thing out of her mouth was, "Good, you finally did it. Now you finish it." Maeve is 44 years old, and she has spent her whole grown life being the one who says out loud the thing the rest of us only let ourselves think. She had never once forgiven Larkin for what those 3 years had done to me, and if I am honest, she had never quite forgiven me either, for being soft enough to let it happen to me in the first place. She sat down hard across the table and laid it out like a prosecutor laying out a case. "Call the note, Mom. Pull the trademark for good, license them nothing. Let Calderwood walk away, and let the whole rotten thing collapse into a hole in the ground where it belongs. They turned you into furniture. They hired an actress and put her in an apron and called her your mother while your mother carried the canapes. You do not owe those people a soft landing. You owe them the truth, and the truth is they have got nothing in this world without you, so take every last thing and do not you dare look back." Ramona, standing at the counter pouring the coffee, saw it different. She had buried a husband and built herself a quiet life out of the broken pieces, and she knew a thing that Maeve was still too young and too angry to know. She set a steaming cup down in front of me, and she said, "Cora, you do not have to go deciding who to destroy in order to be free. You already walked out that door. You already took back your own name. You could let the lawyers settle the paper between them and never set your foot in that life again and just live. Sleep in late. Bake for people who say thank you and mean it. Some doors a woman closes gentle, and then she walks away, and she does not stand around in the yard watching to see whose fingers get caught." And then there was Renata, who was neither soft like Ramona nor furious like Maeve, just precise and precise, turned out to be the hardest of the three voices to argue against. She called me that very afternoon, and she said, "I am not going to tell you what you want, Cora. That has never been my job. But I am going to tell you exactly what you are holding so you do not throw it away by accident in a fit of mercy. You can end them. Today. The leverage is just that complete. But leverage this clean is a rare thing in this life, and a smart woman does not pull the trigger before she has looked all the way down the barrel. Before you decide one thing, I want you to understand the whole of the picture, not just your own corner of it. Because something about how fast Calderwood froze that deal is bothering me, and I have learned over 30 years not to like it when I am bothered. That was the one thread none of the others could quite see, except for Renata, and the moment she said it out loud, I could not unsee it either. A company the size of Calderwood does not put millions of dollars on ice in a single afternoon, just because one old trademark looks a little wobbly. They had moved too fast and they had moved too hard. And that meant they were not only protecting themselves against a chain of title problem, they were protecting themselves against something they had already on their own begun to find. So when Calderwood's acquisition counsel reached out through Renata the following week, asking to sit down and clarify this whole question of ownership, I told Renata I would meet with them, but only on the one condition that I got to see what it was they were looking at. As the registered owner of the trademark sitting at the dead center of their entire due diligence, I had the standing to see the materials that touched my own property, and they wanted my cooperation badly enough to swing that door open. That was the way in. Not me sneaking and snooping, them needing me. And so for 2 days, I sat in a borrowed conference room down the hall at Renata's firm, with the Calderwood diligence file spread out across the long table in front of me. And I did the thing I had done at my own kitchen table every Sunday night for 25 years. While Lyle sharpened his pencil down to a nub, I read the books. I read them slow, and I read them honest, the way you read a recipe you do not quite trust, checking every measure against what you already know in your hands to be true. I want you to picture it, because this is the part where the lady who helps out goes back to being who she always was underneath. An old woman in a borrowed conference room, reading glasses down on her nose, a yellow legal pad at her elbow, just like Lyle used to keep, working through a stack of financials one page at a time. I started with the parts I understood best, the revenue and the cost of goods, the things a person who has actually sold a cake for actual money can feel in her fingertips. I followed the money the way you would follow a thread through a dark house, room to room, not letting go of it. I made my little notes. I checked the platform reports against the summaries, and the summaries against the projections, and the projections against the contracts in the back folders. It is slow work. It is the kind of work that bores most people half to death. But I have never once been bored by a number that did not want to be looked at, because a number that does not want to be looked at is always, always hiding something. And on the second afternoon, somewhere around 3 o'clock, with the light going long and gold across that table, I found the body. Because Birdie's was not only a brand built on a name that was not hers, that much I had known since the window at the party. What I found in those pages was worse, and it was the particular kind of worse that a woman who ran a real business for 25 years knows the second she lays eyes on it. The numbers were dressed up. Not all of them, no. Larkin was far too clever to fake the whole of it. And underneath all the paint, there was a real business there, a genuinely good one, which is the part that broke my heart a little. But she had built the story she sold to Calderwood out of pieces that simply did not hold together once you took the trouble to lay them down side by side in the light. She had told Calderwood, in writing, in signed representations a court could one day read out loud, that the company owned all of its intellectual property free and clear. That was a lie, flat out, and she either knew it was a lie, or she had spent 8 years very carefully arranging never to ask herself the question. That alone was a serious thing, the kind that gets a fancy name, material misrepresentation, and ends deals and starts lawsuits and ruins the people standing nearest to it. But it went on down deeper than the name. She had 2 newer product lines on the books showing strong recurring revenue, and when I traced those numbers, really traced them, the way Lyle taught me to trace a thing I did not believe, the money was moving in a circle. The same dollars were being booked as a sale from one company she controlled to another company she also controlled. Then dressed up looked like real outside money coming in from real outside customers so that the growth would look fatter and the whole business would be worth more to a buyer. The follower counts and the engagement numbers which she had handed over to Calderwood did not match the actual platform reports, sitting 3 folders deeper in the very same file. She had a wholesale partnership listed as signed and active, that when I sat and read the actual emails, had only every friend conversation that quietly died and never once closed. None of it was a forged signature you could hold up to the window and catch in the light. It was quieter than that, and smarter, and in some ways a good deal more dangerous, because it was the kind of thing that only ever shows itself to somebody who already knows, down in her hands, exactly how a true and honest set of books is supposed to breathe. I took off my reading glasses and I rubbed at my eyes, and Renata, who had been sitting across from me, watching my face the whole afternoon, said, "What is it? What did you find?" And I told her. Larkin did not just borrow a name she had no right to. She lied to a serious company to get them to buy that name, lied about what she owned, and lied about what the business truly was. And she put her own name to those lies in writing more than once. And that changed every single thing I had thought I was holding, because here is what it meant, sitting in that gold-lit room. I had walked into all of this thinking the very worst that could land on Larkin was that she lost the brand, which she had surely earned. What those pages were telling me was that Calderwood, a sophisticated buyer with armies of lawyers, had been lied to and signed documents in the middle of a major transaction. That is not a family squabble that gets settled over a Sunday supper. That is the kind of thing that follows a person through courtrooms for years, that takes the house and the savings and the good name right along with the business. That ends a life as that person knew it. But that was not even the part that turned my stomach to ice. The part that did was this. As I sat there reading, I began to notice the diligence team's own notes scratched into the margins of that file, their internal comments, the little questions they had been flagging up for themselves as they went. And they were already onto it. 2 full weeks before my letter ever landed on a desk, before I had so much as picked up the phone to call Renata, Calderwood's own people had circled the very IP question I had found, and circled the revenue from the 2 newer lines, and written in that flat, dry shorthand that lawyers use, the words possible misrepresentation, recommend escalation. They had opened an internal review of their own. The thread was already being pulled, and it had been for 2 weeks by people who had nothing whatsoever to do with me, and no reason on this green earth to protect a single soul in that family. I sat back in that chair, and I understood the true shape of the thing for the very first time, and it was nothing at all like the shape I had carried into the room. I had thought I was the one holding the detonator. I had thought the power was mine, that I was the one who got to choose whether all of this came down or not. But the bomb was not mine. Calderwood had the match in their own hand, and had for 2 weeks. It was going to go off whether or not I ever lifted a single finger, and when it went off, it was not going to land neat and tidy on Larkin alone. It was going to bring the whole house down on top of her, and on top of everybody sleeping under that roof. And there was exactly one person sitting in that conference room who had spent a quarter of a century learning in her own 2 hands how a real business is built up and how a real business comes apart, who knew to the inch how a set of books unravels and exactly where you have to get ahead of it to save it, and who held the one piece of clean, true, unarguable ownership that the entire wreck now hung upon. One person in the world with the skill and the standing and the reason both to walk the whole thing back from the edge of the cliff before Calderwood handed it off to a courtroom. It was the lady who helps out. Outside that window, the afternoon was going long and gold across the city the way it does, and I sat there with my daughter-in-law's whole entire future spread out across the table in front of me. And for the first time since that night at the party, I did not feel 1 ounce of powerful. I felt sick. Because somewhere across town, 2 children I loved with my whole heart were sitting down to their supper in a house that was already starting to come down around their ears. And the only person left on this earth who could either bring it down clean or hold it up was the very woman they had taught their fancy little friends to call the help. Renata set the meeting for the following Monday in her own conference room, 10 o'clock in the morning, and she made it formal as a funeral. A letter on the firm letterhead requesting the presence of Wade and Larkin Brennan to discuss the ownership and the pending transaction. Counsel welcome, attendance expected. Renata loves that word, expected. They came at 9:50, and I heard the three of them out in the hall before the door ever opened. The woman who walked through that door was not the woman from the party. The Larkin I knew came at a room in her heels, and a cloud of expensive perfume with her chin already up in the air, already winning before a word got said. This one wore a plain gray dress and flat shoes and almost no makeup at all, her hair pulled back tight like she had not found the strength to do a thing with it that morning. She had aged 5 years in 2 weeks. She came in and she would not look at me, not at my face. She looked instead at the table and at the window and down at her own hands folded in her lap. And somehow all of that told me more than anything she could have stood up and said. Wade looked worse than she did, unshaven, his shirt wrinkled like he had slept in it, his eyes sunk and red-rimmed, and when he saw me sitting there, his whole face came apart for just a second before he caught it and held it together, because their lawyer was in the room, a young man in a good suit who looked, the moment he understood what was actually sitting on Renata's table, like he would rather be anywhere else on the face of the earth. We sat, Renata at the head of the table, me down one long side, the three of them across from us in a row, and Renata did not waste so much as a breath. She laid it all out flat and plain. My client, Cora Brennan, is the registered owner of the Birdie's trademark and the holder of the underlying trade secrets. No valid assignment was ever recorded with the federal government. There is no license existence. This company has been operating on my client's property for 8 years without legal right to it, and the pending sale to the Calderwood Group cannot close without her participation because she is the owner of the very thing being sold. That is not a threat, and it is not a negotiating posture. It is simply where the law sits this Monday morning. Their young lawyer cleared his throat and started to say something about good faith and prior course of dealing, and Renata, without a word, slid a single sheet of paper across that table to him. He read it, and he stopped talking. She has a gift for that, Renata does. I have watched her do it for 30 years, and it never gets old. We know, Larkin said suddenly into the quiet. Her voice was wrecked, scraped right down to the bare wood. We already know all of it. We have read it. You do not have to do all of this. We know what you have. And that was the moment I reached into my folder and took out the second thing, the part she did not know I had laid my eyes on. I took out the Calderwood diligence pages, the ones with the looped revenue and the IP representations and the partnership that was never signed, and I turned them around so they faced her across the table, and I slid them across slow, the way you slide something fragile. And I said the one thing I had decided I would say in that whole meeting, the only thing. I built this name before you could spell it. Do not sit there and tell me what is in these pages. I can read them in the dark. Larkin went white, not pale, white like the blood just left her, because she knew to the comma exactly what was in those pages. And until that very second she had believed, the way every single person who has ever cooked a book believes right up until the end, that no other living soul could actually see it, that she had been clever enough, careful enough, that the numbers told the story she wanted them to tell, and nobody would ever bother to turn them over. Her own young lawyer leaned in beside her and read, and I watched him get down to the looped revenue, and I watched a green attorney understand in real time that his client had handed him a problem far bigger than good faith could ever fix. He sat back slow in his chair. He did not say anything either. Renata's table had gone very quiet. The optimistic numbers, I said to Larkin then, quiet now just to her, the rest of the room falling away, those a person can sometimes manage to explain away to a jury as aggressive projections. People do survive optimistic. But telling Calderwood in writing that you owned what you plainly did not own, and moving the same dollars around in a circle to make the company look like more than it honestly is, that is not optimism, child. That is a story you told a serious buyer to get at their money, and you signed your name to it. I spent 25 years keeping books that were true, because my husband taught me at our kitchen table that a number you have to lie about today is a number that will come back for you down the road. You looked at me for 3 years, and you saw nothing but an old woman who could not tell a good year from a bad one. You never once thought to ask what I did before I came to cook your suppers and keep the dog upstairs. The room was dead silent. Wade had his head down in his hands. And then Renata said, the thing that turned the whole meeting on its hinge, the thing I had not yet let myself say out loud, even to myself. She said, here's what nobody at this table has put on it yet, so I am going to. Calderwood already knows. Their own diligence team flagged the IP and the revenue 2 full weeks before my client mailed a single letter. They have an internal review open right this minute. So understand me. This is no longer a private matter that this family gets to control behind its own closed doors. With or without Cora Brennan lifting one finger, this surfaces. The only question left in this room is whether it surfaces as a controlled, corrected, honestly handled thing, managed by the one person alive who actually knows how to handle it, or as a referral to Calderwood's litigators and whatever those men decide to do after that. And there it sat, said plain to the whole table. The thing I had only come to understand myself 2 days before in that gold-lit room. The bomb was already lit. I was not the one who got to set it off. I was the only one who could defuse it. Then we took a break, because the air in that room had gotten too thick to breathe. Renata walked the young lawyer down to the lobby for a coffee, which is a thing lawyers do when the grown people in the room need the door pulled shut, and it left just the 3 of us alone, me and my son and the woman my son had married. And that is when the part I had been missing for 8 long years finally came up out of my boy. Wade could not look at me while he said it. He kept his eyes down on the grain of the table. Mom, he said, you need to know why those papers never got filed. And I owe you the whole truth of it, the real one, because I have been carrying it since 2018, and it has just about eaten me alive from the inside. He took a breath, like a man stepping off the edge of a high place. When Larkin handed me that stack off the island that afternoon and told me to take it to the lawyer and get it finished, I drove it into town. I had it right there in my hands, on the passenger seat, and I parked outside the lawyer's office, and I sat there in the car, and I could not make myself get out and walk in that door. Because something in me knew, even way back then, that the day that paper got filed was the day the last thing in this world that was really and truly yours stopped being yours. And I did not file it. I drove home and I told Larkin it was done. I told her for 8 years it was done. I let her build up everything she built, believing she owned it, and I let you get treated like a stranger in your own family, and the whole entire time, the one thing standing between her and all of it was a single piece of paper sitting in a locked drawer in my desk that I never once had the courage either to file or to tear up. He lifted his head and looked at me then, finally, and the tears were running right down his face, and he did not even wipe them away. I told myself I was protecting you, he said. But Mom, that is not the truth of it either. The truth is I was too much of a coward to file it, and I was too much of a coward to stand up and tell her to her face why I would not. So I just hid it. I hid your name in a drawer for 8 years, and I called it love, so that I would never have to call it the thing it really was. I sat with that a long moment. There was nothing in me that wanted to make it any easier for him, and nothing in me that wanted to make it harder. I just let it be the size it was. And before I could find a single word, the door opened, because Maeve had been waiting out in that hall the whole time. And my Maeve does not wait well. She had heard the last of it through the door, and she came in and she rounded on her brother with everything she had been holding back for 3 solid years. That is not loyalty, Wade, she said, low and hard. That does not make you the good son who quietly saved her. A loyal man files the paper or a loyal man burns it. What you did was leave yourself an exit. You kept one card in a locked drawer so that someday, if it ever got bad enough, you could ride in and be the hero without ever once, in 8 years, having to actually be brave. You did not protect our mother. You protected your own way out. And you let her pay the bill for it every single day for 3 years so that you would not have to. And the terrible thing, the thing that hung in that quiet room and that I have turned over in my mind near every day since, was that the both of them were right. He had saved me, in a way, by accident, through nothing nobler than his own fear. And he had also let me drown right there beside him for 3 years rather than say one true sentence out loud. Two things, both of them true, living inside the same man at the same time, my son, the boy I raised. Maeve went back out to the hall after she said her piece, because she had emptied herself of it, and my Maeve is not one to stand around in the wreckage she has just made. And the door clicked shut behind her, and the room got quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. A softer kind of quiet, the kind that comes after a storm has finally passed over and moved on down the valley. Wade wiped his face with the back of his hand and looked out the window. And for a long moment, nobody said anything at all, and I let the silence do its slow work, the way you let a doe rest before you ask anything of it. And then into that quiet, Larkin spoke, in a voice I had never once heard come out of her in all the years I had known her. Can I tell you something? She said. Something I have never told one single person in this family. She kept her eyes down on her own folded hands. My mother is alive, she said. Her name is Maxine. She has cooked the overnight shift at a truck stop diner off the interstate for 28 years. The kind of place that smells like burnt coffee and fryer grease at 4 in the morning. And she is the finest cook I have ever known in my whole life. Better than me, better than anyone. And I have spent 13 years letting people believe she is dead. When folks ask me about my family, I let them think it was my grandmother who taught me everything, the grandmother in the apron, the one we built out of nothing for the cameras. I have never once had my own mother to a single one of my homes. She has never met my children. I send her money every month so that I do not have to send her myself. I did not say a word. There is a time to talk and a time to let a person keep walking out onto the thin ice she has chosen all on her own. And this was the second kind. So I sat and I waited and I let her walk. When I was a girl, Larkin said my mother used to drive the two of us a whole hour on her one day off to a little bakery in a brick storefront in a town I have spent my entire adult life pretending I am not from. And we could not afford much of anything, the two of us. But she would buy one single slice of buttermilk honey cake, just the one, and she would split it right down the middle between us, with a plastic fork in the front seat of the car, in the parking lot, before we even pulled out. And she would say to me, baby, this right here, this is what a family that truly loves each other tastes like. And I want you to remember it, so that one day when you are grown, you can go and build yourself a life that tastes like this. The room had gone very still. I knew that parking lot. I knew that brick storefront. I had handed that exact slice across that exact counter 10,000 times with my own two hands. It was your shot, Larkin said. And finally, she lifted her eyes and looked straight at me, and her whole ruined face was open, in a way it had never once been in 3 years of living under the same roof. It was Bertie's, the real one. My mother drove me to your bakery when I was 9 years old and told me that was what a good family tasted like, and I never forgot it, not for one day. And when I grew up and I got so hungry to be somebody, the very first thing I reached for, without even understanding why I was reaching for it, was the one thing that had ever made me feel safe and loved as a child. I did not stumble onto Bertie's by accident, Cora. I went looking for it. I came and I found you on purpose. And then I took the one place on earth that had ever felt like home to me, and I scrubbed my own mother right out of the story of it, and I built a fake grandmother to stand in the very spot where the real woman who took me there belonged. I erased the person who led me to you, and then I erased you too. And I called the whole thing my brand. She was not crying for my sympathy. I want to be clear on that. She was crying the way a person cries when something 30 years old and gone rotten is finally draining up and out of them. I was so ashamed of where I came from, she said, of the diner and the grease and the secondhand everything, and the smell of it that I could never quite wash off, that I spent my whole life running just as hard as I could away from it. And I ran in a perfect circle right back around to the one kitchen that had ever once been kind to me. And the very first thing I did when I got there, the first thing, was do to you the exact thing I was so terrified the whole world would do to me. I made you the help. I took the woman who actually built it, and I turned her into the woman who just helps out. I became the very thing I was running from, and then I made you wear it for me. And I will tell you, sitting there in that chair, that all the cold I had carried into that room did not just up and vanish. I want to be honest with you about that, because people hear a story like this one and they want the sad childhood to come along and wash the whole slate clean, and it does not work that way. And I would be lying to you if I said it did. Understanding why a person hurt you is not the same thing as deciding that the hurt did not happen. She had still done every bit of it, with her eyes wide open for years on end. But here is the other thing that is also true. You cannot sit and watch a human being finally see themselves all the way down to the very bottom and go on wanting to break them in half. I am not built that way. And somewhere in those weeks, I had stopped wanting to be. Renata knocked and back into the room just then, and her face was tighter than it had been when she left it. And she said, Cora, before you decide one single thing, you need the timeline. And I will tell you right now, you are not going to like it. Calderwood's review is moving faster than I thought it would. I just got off the telephone with their counsel in the hall. They are deciding this week whether to walk away from the whole thing quietly or hand it over to their litigation team. And here is the thing nobody at this table has said out loud yet, so I am going to say it. Wade, your name is on the household finances and on the company guarantees both. The children's college accounts are tangled up into the business collateral. If this goes to litigation and the company comes apart in an uncontrolled way, it does not stop at Larkin. It reaches you. It reaches the house you all live in. And it reaches whatever those two babies have got saved for their future. And there it was. The last wall, coming down slow. Because I could still walk away from all of it, even then. I could let it fall, and I would be entirely within my God-given rights to do it, and Larkin would get precisely what she had earned with her own two hands. But the bomb was not aimed at Larkin anymore. It was aimed at my son, who had hidden my name in a drawer for 8 years because he was too frightened of his own wife to do anything else with it. It was aimed at Tate, 10 years old, and at Wren, who was 6, and who still came padding out into the hall at night to ask where her gam had gone off to. 3 years they had spent telling me, in 100 small ways, that I was not really and truly family. And now the only road left that could save the family ran straight through me deciding, right there in that room, that they were mine anyway, that they had always been mine, that love does not, in the end, actually sit around with its arms crossed, waiting to find out whether or not it has been properly earned. I told them I needed the night. Nobody talks to Calderwood until I do, I said. Renata, you hold them off 24 hours. And Renata looked at me a long moment, and she said she could hold anybody on this earth off for 24 hours. And then, lo and just for me, because she is the oldest friend I have got left, and she has long since earned the right, she said, You already know what you are going to do, Cora. You have known since the second I said the children's accounts. I did not answer her, but she was not wrong, and we both knew it. I did not sleep that night either, but it was a different kind of awake than the dread kind I had known in that house. It was the deciding kind. I sat up in Ramona's spare room with the quilt around my shoulders and my mother's recipe box open across my knees, the cards in her own handwriting under my fingers, and I did the thing I have always done when a thing is just too big to feel my way through in the dark. I turned it into a problem I could solve on paper, in 3 columns the way Lyle taught me, because numbers do not beg, and numbers do not lie, and a number has never once in my life called me the help. And by the time the sky out that window had gone the deep blue it goes right before the light comes, I had my answer written plain, and it was the very same answer Renata had seen, sitting on my face a full day before I let myself see it. We met again 2 days after that, the same long table, all of us in our same chairs, and this time I was the one who ran the room. I am not going to destroy you, I said, and I said it first before anything else, because I wanted the both of them sitting there in their own skins to hear it plain and not spend the next 10 minutes braced for the worst. I am not handing this thing over to Calderwood's litigators. I am not letting it burn down to the ground. But the two of you are going to understand exactly what it is I am doing here, because it is not mercy, and it is not me forgetting one single thing that happened. So here's how it is going to go. I am keeping the trademark. I am keeping the recipes. They are mine. They were always mine every day of those 8 years, and they are staying mine. I am not giving birdies away to a living soul, not to you and not to Calderwood. What I am going to do instead is license it to the company on my terms, in writing with a royalty, which means that for the first time in 8 years, the woman whose own mother that name belongs to is finally going to get paid for the use of it. And let me be clear, I am not putting one thin dime of my own money in to bail you out. I am bailing you out with the one thing the two of you decided I did not have, which is everything I know. I am going to take oversight of this company's finances and its books for 3 years. Every number that goes out to Calderwood or to any other buyer that ever comes along crosses desk first, and it is true before it ever leaves this office. Because I happen to know precisely how to walk a company back from this exact ledge and turn a fraud review into a corrected, clean, honest set of books that a buyer can put their trust in. The looped revenue comes off the books today. The partnership that was never signed comes off. And the grandmother in the apron comes off today, this afternoon. We are done painting over things in this family. Because here is the truth of it, Larkin, and I want you to hear it. There's a real business underneath all of that lying. A good one. You built something that was actually real. You just got scared somewhere along the way that real was not going to be enough. And you started painting on top of it. And now we are going to stop painting. And we are going to rebuild what is honestly there. Larkin was nodding, quiet, the tears just running down and dropping off her chin onto the table, and she did not wipe them. And then I told them the two conditions that had nothing to do with money and were not the first bit up for a discussion. The first one, I said, is the brand itself. From this day on, Birdie's tells the true story. My mother's name and my own name go back on it, out loud, in the open, right where they have always belonged. No more invented grandmother in a costume. The real ones or none at all? And the second condition, I said, and I turned in my chair and I looked straight at Larkin. The second one is your mother. I want Maxine at the table, not hidden away, not a secret you mail a check to so you can keep from mailing yourself. I want her known. In your home, in front of every glossy friend you have got, introduced out loud as your mother, who fed strangers on the overnight shift for 28 years so that her girl could grow up and build something. Because you spent your whole entire life so ashamed of where you came from that you turned right around and did to me the very thing you were so terrified the world would do to you. And the only way I have ever known to break a thing like that is to stop being ashamed of the woman who got you here. She is the reason you ever once walked through my door. You will honor her out loud in front of all of them until the day it stops being hard. Larkin put her face down in both her hands, and she cried like something 30 years old and heavy was finally coming loose from where it had been lodged. But I did not move back into that house. And I want to be real clear with you about that, because people always expect the part where the grandmother comes home, where the family closes warm and whole around her and the music swells. That part did not come, and I did not want it to. I had learned something on Ramona Pike's spare bed that I was not about to unlearn for anybody's happy ending, my own included. I had learned what it felt like to wake up in a place that did not want one single thing from me, and I was not handing that back, not for love nor money. I would hold the family up, but I would not move back inside of it. There is a difference between those two things, a world of difference, and I had paid 3 hard years to learn it. It has been a little over a year now since that morning at the long table, and I am not going to sit here and tell you it all turned clean and sweet right after, because the honest version is the one nobody quite believes, on account of nobody has ever actually lived the greeting card. Real repair has got scars worked right down into it, in the seams where you cannot see them unless you go looking, and ours has too. I took a small 2-bedroom apartment over in the arts district of the city, with good morning light that comes in slantwise across the floor and a little balcony just big enough for 2 chairs and a coffee cup. And I made every single inch of it mine, the first thing in a long, long time that was only and entirely mine. My mother's recipe box sits out on my kitchen counter where I use it nearly every day the way it was always meant to be used, not as a prop on somebody else's styled shelf. The old wooden Birdie's sign hangs by my front door, and I lay my hand on it for luck every morning on my way out, the same as I did for 25 years, and now it is mine again to touch. I teach a little class on Tuesday evenings down at the community center, baking and the basics of running a small business, mostly for women who are starting up something of their own late in life or after a hard turn, or just because they finally decided to. It turns out 25 years of reading the books and ruining the batches is worth something passed on. There is one woman in the class, Deborah, a little younger than me, who lost her husband last spring the way I lost my Lyle, and who shows up every week with her hands shaking and a recipe of her grandmother's she wants to turn into a real thing she can sell at the market. I look at her some Tuesdays and I see myself at the start of it all scared and grieving and standing on a milk crate of one kind or another. And I think this is the work now. This right here. Bertie survived. We pulled it back from the edge of that cliff, one honest inch at a time, and it turns out a business with something real underneath it can be saved if somebody who knows the books gets there before the buyer's lawyers do. The looped revenue came off. The invented grandmother came off. Calderwood, once they saw the correction was being run by a person who plainly knew exactly what she was doing, took the quiet path instead of the courtroom one, the way serious money usually will when you give it a clean way out. There was no lawsuit. Wade kept the house. The children kept their college accounts, and they will never once know how close that ran, and I intend to keep it that way until the day I die. I license the name to the company now, on my terms, and royalty check comes to my apartment every quarter, with my own name printed right there on the front of it. And I will tell you, the first one of those did not feel like money at all when I opened the envelope. It felt like an apology that had finally learned how to spell. Wade and I go to a counselor together now, just the two of us, once a week, and we are doing the slow and clumsy work of figuring out how a boy I raised up to be brave learned somewhere along the way to go so quiet so that he does not turn around and hand that same silence down to Tate without ever meaning to. Some weeks he does not say much of anything at all. He just comes and sits with me the way he used to do when he was a little boy. And something was too big for the words he had, and I have come to learn that those are the visits that mend the most. The drawer in his desk is empty now. He filed nothing and he hid nothing. He just stopped pretending finally, and it turns out that was the only brave thing I ever needed out of him in the first place. With Larkin, it came the way I told her at that table it would have to come. Earned in actions over time and slower than anybody in that room wanted it to. The first Sunday that Maxine came to dinner, Larkin's hands were shaking so badly she could hardly set the table right, and she stood up in front of a room full of her glossy friends, and she said, "I want you all to meet my mother, Maxine, who cooked the overnight shift for 28 years," and her voice broke clean in half on the word mother. And Maxine, this small, tough woman with a line cook's burned forearms and a laugh like a screen door, she just lit up like the sun coming over a ridge. By the third Sunday, it was not hard anymore. By summer, Larkin was bragging on her. "My mother raised me on a line cook's wages. Can you imagine the discipline of that woman?" And I noticed a couple of those glossy friends got quiet and thoughtful, and one of them, I heard later, started treating the woman who cleaned her own house a good deal different. It is a funny thing how that spreads once one person stops being ashamed out loud. Maxine and I have gotten close, the two of us, two women who fed other people for a living and got called the help for our trouble. She calls me her sister now, and she means it, and on Sundays the two of us stand at the counter together and cook, and we do not say much, and we do not need to. I do not pretend that Larkin and I are what we might have been if none of it had ever happened. There is a carefulness between the two of us that I do not believe will ever fully leave, a half a step of distance that is just always going to be there, and I have made my own peace with that. She texts me small things now, a photograph of the children, a question about the cake, a picture of the garden coming up. A while back, she sent me one that just said, "I see you now, Cora. I am sorry it took me so long. I see you." I did not write a paragraph back to her. I wrote, "I know you do." And I left it right there, because some things you do not need to go making any bigger in order to make them true. Last week, my Wren, who is 7 years old now, brought me a drawing she had made. It is a picture of me standing in front of an open door, holding my tin box in both my hands, and over my head, in her careful, crooked little letters, she had written, "My Gamcora put her own name back." I had it framed at the Good Frame Shop, the same one Lyle used to drive 40 minutes to. It sits up on my mantle now, in the good morning light next to the old sign. And I am in this one. After 3 years of clean rectangles in the dust where I should have been, I am in this one. I made good and sure of it. Folks keep telling me the brave part was the walking out. It was not. The brave part was finally saying the thing out loud, that I had taught them how to treat me. Every cake I made without a thank you, every label they printed with my mother's name on it, and not one word about mine, I called all of it love. It was not love. It was fear, dressed up in an apron. I spent a whole lifetime putting other people's names where my own should have gone, and I called that being good. At 67, I finally learned the difference. Your worth is not a recipe you give away for free, and then sit hoping somebody credits you for it later. It is the one thing you keep your own name on, no matter who is sitting at the table. I did not leave to make them sorry. I left so that I could finally read my own name on the jar and mean it.